Hello to our friends joining us via recording. We are wrapping up lesson number 9 today about the muscular system. To get us ready to wrap up this material, we created a flow chart to help us understand what happens in the Croxbridge cycle. Before we can do the Croxbridge cycle, which is the way that myosin and actin pull past each other, remember that we have to start with calcium, because calcium is the ion that can attach to our pushpin protein, that pushpin protein called troponin. When calcium attaches to troponin, it causes that pushpin to change its shape, pops out of shape. That means that tropomyosin is going to change its shape too. It's going to slide away from those places on actin where it was blocking myosin from attaching. And that's going to bring us into the Croxbridge cycle. Now, we have more boxes that we see here in our little Croxbridge cycle that's going on in a circle than the number of steps, which means that some of these things that we have in boxes go together to make a step happen. But let's see if we can go through with the names of those steps and match them up with boxes. The first step of the Croxbridge cycle is when myosin and actin attach to each other. For my friends here in the chat, can you remind me, what is it called when myosin attaches to actin? What's the name of that step? We're all flipping through our notes, right? I'll list our steps over here. So step number 1, step number 1 is called Croxbridge Formation. Croxbridge Formation. In Croxbridge Formation, it sounds all technical, but remember, all a crossbridge is when myosin and actin are attached to each other. That's the first step of the Croxbridge cycle. The first way we make movement is Croxbridge Formation. So all that happens in step 1, I'm going to put that right underneath that box up there. All that happens in step 1, Croxbridge Formation, it's just a fancy way for saying that myosin attaches to actin. Croxbridge Formation. Now, my next step of the Croxbridge cycle is called what? What's the name of the next step of the Croxbridge cycle? This one should be easier to type, right? Not quite as long. Yeah, the second step of the Croxbridge cycle is called the power stroke. Now, in the power stroke, as some of us were saying in our chat, this is where we actually do movement. So one of the boxes that I have listed here that shows me movement for sure is right here. Movement, the way that muscle contraction happens, is when actin slides past myosin. The ability for actin to slide past myosin is because myosin goes from the upright position where it's attached to actin to the bent over position. When it bends, it moves actin with it. The reason that myosin is going to bend, or the reason that myosin changes its shape, is because it's spitting out, we kind of called them junk or waste products here. It's going to spit out something called ADP, as well as an inorganic phosphate or PI. This process right here where myosin spits out these things that it was attached to, that's what leads us to sliding. So this box that we see here is also part of step 2. Two things happen in the power stroke. First, myosin gets rid of its junk. Second, that allows it to change its shape and pull actin along with it. So both of these steps here are part of that power stroke stage of the process of muscle contraction. Next, we see that ATP attaches to myosin. When ATP attaches to myosin, myosin can't stay attached to actin anymore. Both of these things go together in step 3 of the Croxbridge cycle. What was step 3 of the Croxbridge cycle called? Step 3, and this one's a longer one to type again. Step 3 is cross-bridge detachment. When myosin detaches from or lets go of actin. When myosin lets go of actin, the reason it did that is because myosin has something that it wants to hold more. What it wants to hold more than actin is it wants to hold ATP. It wants to hold this energy-rich molecule. So my third step here happens when ATP comes and attached to myosin, and myosin says, oh, I don't need actin anymore. We're done with that. So both of these boxes here are my step 3 in the cross-bridge cycle. What happens in detachment is a molecule of ATP attaches to myosin. When that ATP attaches to myosin, that's going to allow it to let go of actin. That's going to cause detachment to happen. Now, my last two things here are also a set of things that both happen in the same stage. There were a couple of different ways that we referred to stage 4. What were the names of those ways that we referred to myosin, or referred to step 4? Gave away part of it, right? Yeah, so there's two ways I can refer to it. So cocking the myosin head, or what some of our videos call it too, is reactivation of the myosin head. When myosin is not attached to actin anymore, it's bent over. It's kind of in the bent position. So we'll draw what myosin looks like here. Here's the golf club head of myosin. When I let go of actin, I'm bent over like this. I cannot attach to actin again when I'm bent over like this. So the last state, either calling it the cocking of the myosin head or the reactivation of the myosin head, I need to go from this bent over position into the upright position, where my myosin head is up and it's ready to attach to actin again. To take me from being bent over to being standing up, I have to use energy. I have to break down my ATP. So in my last step here, both of these two things, my two boxes, are step 4. In my last step of the process of muscle contraction, I break down ATP, which allows me to return to my cocked position, or the upright position, which, as long as there's still calcium, and as long as troponin and tropomyosin are out of the way, when I get back to the cocked position, I can attach to actin again, and we'll go through this whole process over and over again. So the last step, cocking the myosin head, reactivation of the myosin head, gets me ready to go back to step 1. Gets me ready to make a new cross bridge so that I can do more movement, so that I can let go again, so that I can get ready to do it all again. When we talked about the cross-bridge cycle last week, we related this to rigor mortis, which is when your muscles get stiff after you die. What was the specific step that we said stops or is specifically blocked when someone is experiencing rigor mortis? Which of those steps is blocked? Yeah, so we're correct in our chat there. It's step 3. We get stuck at the end of step 2. We can't move into step 3 because the body has stopped making ATP. If I don't make ATP, I get stuck here at the end of step 2. At the end of step 2, I'm attached to actin, but I'm stuck attached to actin. It's not until step 3 when I attach to a new ATP molecule that let actin go. So my muscle stays contracted. It stays stuck together. So rigor mortis, if we wanted to make a little mark for ourselves, rigor mortis, we get held up right here. We cannot transition from step 2 into step 3. No ATP to attach to myosin, which means myosin can't let go of actin. They're stuck together forever, at least until until our muscles start to literally fall apart. Then we won't see rigor mortis anymore because our muscles are just falling apart. Yeah, and so Nicole mentioned to make ATP, we need to have oxygen. That's correct. Actually, that's a great transition into our topics today, because it's not 100% true that you need to have oxygen to make ATP. It's just most of the time that we use oxygen to make ATP. So let's hold that thought and we'll explore that together. Does that sound good, Nicole? So let me pull up my slides here, and you guys can help me with what page in your notes we're on. We're going to do some fun analogies. This is fitting too because it's fall now, right? What page are we on in the notes with our lumberjacks here? Okay, looks like we're on page 13. Okay. As we talk about our last characteristic of muscle fibers, the last thing we need to know about muscle fibers is that they have different names. Bear with me for a moment. Gotta grab. Can you grab it on that side so I see where it is? Sharing my office for a moment. Okay, so even before, I'm gonna switch gears. Before we look at our analogy, let's talk about muscle fibers really fast. In the body, we have three types of muscle fibers, or three types of skeletal muscle tissue. They have long names, so I won't make you type all the names for me. One of the names that we have is, one of the types that we have is called fast glycolytic fibers. That's the first name that we have. Then we have fast, or actually let's do slow oxidative fibers. And then we have fast oxidative fibers. So if we were to look at a cross section of skeletal muscle tissue, look at a muscle, we would actually see that not every muscle cell looks exactly the same, and not every muscle cell functions exactly the same. The names of these types of muscle tissues that we see here actually tell us a whole lot about them. What they tell us comes from the two main words, the first two words in their name. So the first comparison when we talk about the way that skeletal muscle tissue functions is whether it is fast or whether it's slow. So we'll make a comparison over here, fast and slow. That's the first thing about my muscle tissues. The second thing about them are those second words there. So glycolytic and oxidative. Now, Nicole had asked us the question, and let's start with that question. If we needed oxygen to make ATP, if we're talking about a type of muscle tissue that is what we call an oxidative muscle tissue, then 100% yes, you must have oxygen. So oxidative tissues must have O2, right, abbreviation there. An oxidative muscle tissue must have oxygen to make its ATP. The reason that an oxidative muscle type must have oxygen to make its ATP is because the process that an oxidative type of muscle tissue uses is something called the electron transport. I'm gonna have to move that. Electron transport chain. Electron transport chain. Hopefully you've heard about that at some point in your educational career. I promise I'm not going to make you memorize how the electron transport chain works. What I do want you to know about the electron transport chain, two things about the electron transport chain. First thing that we should know about it, so thing number one, is it makes lots of ATP. The electron transport chain is really efficient at making ATP for us. It makes a ton. The second thing, though, is a limitation of it, and it's kind of what we actually already said. At the end of the electron transport chain, where I put my electrons that have no energy left, that's why it's called the electron transport chain. I'm stealing their energy. At the end of the electron transport chain, my electrons that don't have energy anymore end up attached to oxygen. So we have to have oxygen, we have to have O2 present, because at the end of the electron transport chain, we give oxygen our low energy electrons. It actually ends up making for us, just for kicks and giggles, for you to know, you don't actually have to know this, we end up making water at the end of the electron transport chain, because I give oxygen some really low energy electrons and they end up pairing oxygen with some hydrogen. So the electron transport chain, my body uses it in all of my cells. All of my cells have it for the most part. Oxidative muscle cells rely on this as their energy source. So the electron transport chain makes a ton of ATP, like 36 molecules of ATP. We end by making water, that's our waste product. But for us to be able to do that, we've got to have oxygen. So oxidative muscle tissues, what we should know about those, two things. Thing number one, they use the electron transport chain to make their energy. Thing number two, for the electron transport chain to work, we've got to have oxygen. So this type of skeletal muscle tissue, we must have oxygen for us to be able to use it, for it to be able to contract. So when I look over here at my three types of muscle tissue, a couple of them have the word oxidative in their name. The ones that have oxidative in their name, it tells us that the way they build their ATP is by using the electron transport chain. So if you see oxidative in the name of a type of muscle tissue, that's going to be a type of muscle tissue that makes its energy using the electron transport chain, the electron transport chain. So two of my three types of muscle tissue, let's underline my names here so we can separate them. Two of the three types of skeletal muscle tissue in your body need oxygen to be able to make their ATP. The other type of muscle tissue in your body is called glycolytic muscle tissue. The word glycolytic means I use a process called glycolysis. Glycolysis. Glycolysis is another process I'm not going to make you learn. But let's see if we can use its name to figure out what's happening. Lysis means I'm breaking something. Any guesses what glyco might mean? Breaking something down. Yeah, so the technical name for what I break down in muscle cells is my stored form of glucose. So here's a little talk about muscles. Glucose, remember, is our cells' favorite foods, right? They like glucose. If we happen to have some extra glucose floating around in our cell, what our cell will do is it will turn it into glycogen. So glycogen is the way that a muscle cell stores glucose. It stores its sugar. The reason that muscle cells want to store this glycogen, store this sugar, is because I can break down sugar to make ATP using glycolysis. So glycolysis is the process that I use to break down glucose, or to break down, if you want to remember it as glycogen, because that's closer, right? I break down these sugar molecules to generate ATP. Now, here's some things about glycolysis. Let's move the label down here. Here's some things to know about glycolysis. First thing we should know about glycolysis, it's not a lot of ATP. Glycolysis is only going to make like 2 to 4 molecules of ATP. When we talked about the electron transport chain, we were talking like 32. So glycolysis is way less efficient than the electron transport chain. It doesn't make nearly as much ATP as the electron transport chain does. That's the first thing to know. The second thing to know, though, which is a contrast to the electron transport chain, is no oxygen is required for this process to happen. Glycolysis can happen and does happen without oxygen. So if you stop breathing or you're not getting enough oxygen to your muscles, the good news is some of your types of muscle tissue can keep contracting without using oxygen. And hey, when we talk about glycolysis, the other thing about glycolysis is this happens fast. The way that glycolysis makes ATP from glucose or from glycogen, it can do it really efficiently or really quickly. See, we didn't talk about this a lot with the electron transport chain. The electron transport chain is literally building ATP, so this is going to be a slower process. The electron transport chain works more slowly than the process of glycolysis works. Now, remember, glycolysis, it might happen quickly, and it may not take oxygen, but we don't build a lot of ATP from it. So here's my 2 pros: no oxygen and it happens quickly. My con is we're not going to build a lot from it. With the electron transport chain, we're happy because we make a ton of ATP. It's just it takes a little longer for us to kind of kickstart that engine, if you will, to build the ATP. And I have to always have oxygen. Otherwise, the electron transport chain can't work. So anybody who's got the word oxidative in their name, if they're a muscle fiber, they're going to use the electron transport chain. They're going to use oxygen to build their ATP. Anybody with glycolytic in their name is going to use the process of glycolysis to build their ATP. We're going to describe it over here, I guess. Glycolysis. That's the first part of these names. Well, actually, technically the second part, right? Either they are oxidative skeletal muscle tissue or they're glycolytic skeletal muscle tissue. The other thing about these types of muscle tissue, though, is whether they're fast or slow. Fast or slow. And these words, fast or slow, give us an idea of how quickly ATP Ace works. ATP Ace. We know this is an enzyme because it ends with Ace, and its name tells me what it breaks down. Promise, not a trick question. What does ATP Ace break down? Yeah, breaks down, ATP Ace breaks down ATP. That's its job. Like I said, I promise it's not a trick question. ATP Ace breaks down ATP. Some of these ATP Ace enzymes are what we call fast ATP Aces. Some of them are what we call slow ATP Aces. It's not tricky. If I have a fast ATP Ace, it chops up ATP faster than a slow ATP Ace. So with a fast ATP Ace breaks down ATP fast. Imagine that, right? A fast ATP Ace breaks down ATP fast. Why do we care about ATP, by the way? When we say ATP, what should you be thinking? What does a cell use ATP for? Yeah, ATP is your cell's form of stored energy. This is, I like to call it the energy money of the cell. When I break down ATP, that allows me to do something, or that releases energy. So if I've got a fast ATP Ace, that releases energy fast. What that means for you on a practical level, if I'm releasing stored energy really fast, that means I'm going to have a really strong muscle contraction. If all of a sudden I can get all of the energy out of my ATP, that's going to allow me to make a really strong muscle contraction. If I have a slow ATP Ace, that means that I'm going to break down ATP slowly. Again, not tricky. Slow ATP Aces break down ATP slowly. What that means then is my muscle contractions are going to be weaker muscle contractions, which sounds like a not great thing until we consider the benefit of having a slow ATP Ace. Having a slow ATP Ace means that I more slowly break down my ATP, which means that the ATP that I have is going to last me longer. So if I have a slow ATP Ace, ATP lasts longer. I'm going to run out of my energy more slowly because I'm going at a turtle's pace, if you will. I'm very slowly breaking down my ATP. No, I'm not going to make the strongest muscle contraction in the world, but I can use the ATP that I have for a really long time. It's going to last me longer. If I've got a fast ATP Ace, I'm going to use ATP more quickly. So ATP runs out faster because I'm going to town. I'm breaking it down really quickly. I kind of like to think about this when I compare like the way that my daughter eats to the way that like I eat. So if I'm eating something like candy, for example, I'm going to try to eat my candy a little bit more slowly. So if I got a bag of M&Ms, she calls them M&Es. My daughter likes to call them M&Es. So say we're eating Halloween M&Es. I'm going to eat them one at a time. Maybe I'm not going to get as much of that chocolate flavor right away. I'm going to have a weaker flavor sensation, but I'm going to have that sensation for a long time. My daughter is going to be like, OMG, M&Es. And she's going to pour them into her mouth and chew them up really fast, and she's going to run out of M&Ms long before I do. So with a fast ATP Ace, sure, we're going to breeze through those M&Ms really fast. We'll get that chocolate sensation super quickly, but we're going to run out of M&Ms. If we just eat them more slowly, we might not have as much of a sensation all at once, but we're going to last a little bit longer. So second part for us to know about the names of these muscle fibers. First is this glycolytic and oxidative word. Second is this fast and slow word. Fast means that my enzyme that breaks up ATP works really quickly. What that means for me then is really strong contractions. Strong contractions. If I have a slow ATP Ace, I'm going to have weaker contractions, but I can do them for a longer time. So longer lasting contractions. Longer lasting contractions. I have lots of things that I wrote on this slide. I apologize. I probably should have done some color switching and that kind of stuff. Before we go into our analogy, what questions do we have at the moment? So here I'll add my note, strong contractions, that last one. So Tierney asked an interesting question about a dead body flinching at a funeral home. I don't think that's probably glycolysis. I think probably what's more likely is that we're just seeing a point when, we talked about rigor mortis, where the muscles get stuck together. It's possible that maybe putting their makeup kind of forced the muscles apart. That's super interesting and also super creepy. I don't think, though, short answer to what you said is probably not the muscle all of a sudden making some ATP for it to use, I don't think. But possible, maybe, because you don't have to be breathing to do glycolysis. So, that's interesting and really creepy. Now I'm going to have nightmares about bodies, right? Jesse mentioned holding a crying baby for a really long time. My life, right? No. So was that what was that in relationship to, Jesse? Was that the fast and slow thing, maybe, that you were relating that to?
It's easier to the slower ATP Ace, using that to hold something. Is that a slower, using the ATP slowly?
Okay, yeah. So and that's a good correlation. So holding a crying baby, holding anything for a long period of time, even things like your posture, for example, how you're always doing something, right? Hopefully most of us are sitting up, but some of us might be laying in bed, right? Let's just be real. Your posture, the fact that you're always contracting some muscles, we can do that because some of our muscles contract more slowly. So one of the things that comparisons that you make at the end of this lesson is the comparison of which types of muscle fibers would be good for different activities. Holding a baby for a long time, sitting up in a chair for a long time, those are what we might call endurance type exercises. If we're going to be needing to break down ATP to do a muscle movement for a long time, we are probably going to want a slow ATP Ace. That's going to make our ATP last longer, especially if it's not like a really hardcore activity that we're trying to do. Like, we're not trying to sprint for 2 hours. We can do weaker muscle contractions and do them for a longer period of time. Yeah, so holding that baby, sitting up in a chair, doing something for a long time, you probably would want to use a slow ATP Ace for that, definitely. So Jacqueline asked the question, so fast glycolytic breaks down energy very quickly. When we're talking about fast glycolytic, fast always means that we break down energy quickly. The glycolytic part tells me how I make my energy, which is glycolysis. So remember, with glycolysis, that I can make energy fast, which is great too. That means that not only can I do my process that builds me new ATP really quickly, I can chop up that ATP really fast. These are going to be the strongest type of muscle fibers you can contract, because not only do they quickly make ATP, but they can also chop up that ATP really fast. With fast oxidative fibers, fast tells me that I can chop up ATP really quickly, which means I'm going to have strong contractions. Oxidative means that I'm going to use the electron transport chain to make my ATP. So that means that I'm going to make a lot of it. But the caveat is it's going to take me a little bit longer to get started. So my muscle contractions, once they get started, will be really strong, but it's going to take me a little bit longer to get them started because it takes me a little bit longer to start building ATP with the electron transport chain. So as we start looking at activities that you do with different muscles, if we need like one really strong burst of energy, just once, all of a sudden, we would use our fast glycolytic fibers to help with that. If we're talking about more of a strong repeated movement that we might have to do, that's when we would want to use our fast oxidative fibers. Because remember, oxidative means that oxidative means I build a lot of ATP. So if I'm constantly building ATP, it doesn't matter if I'm chopping it up really quickly. If I'm still always making it, that means I can do my movement for a longer period of time. Does that make sense? I kind of tied a few things together. We probably should make another, I'll make another whiteboard here in just a moment. Nicole asked, the oxidative energy is not stored at all. Yeah, so with building energies using, technically the process is called oxidative phosphorylation, or when we use the electron transport chain to make ATP, it's not like I can just build a whole bunch of extra ATP with this. I build it and then I pretty much use it right away. Same thing is true with glycolysis, that when I use glycolysis to build ATP, I use the ATP right away. It's just the thing that I started with glycolysis was a stored sugar. So I had energy stored inside my cell, and because it was stored there and ready for me to chop up, I can use it to build ATP fast. But pretty much when you build that ATP money, you're using it right away, especially when we're talking about a muscle fiber that's trying to contract. Like when you have payday, right? Money comes in and the money goes out. That's the way it is with ATP. Build it, spend it. Build it, spend it. Maybe that analogy helps us. Yeah, so Jesse asked a great question, kind of tying into that. So yeah, we're not going to build really more ATP than what we need. That's part of it. We don't want to build more than what we need. What's also part of it, though, too, is remember that in your body, we've got a whole lot of active transport happening. When we talk about active transport, what did that mean? Active transport. There's a couple different things that means. Okay, yep, so the first thing it means is we got to have energy. Active transport takes energy. And which way do things move? Yeah, Nicole's mentioning our gradients. So we're going up the gradient with active transport. That means we're going to be going from low concentration to high concentration. The fact that, here we'll just bring it all back together because we all love it, right? The fact that we have a salty banana cell, that things are different inside and outside, just existing like this, just being polarized, different inside and outside, takes ATP. We learned about it, right? The sodium-potassium pump, your cell constantly has to do the sodium-potassium pump to help you stay polarized. So any ATP that I build, whether it's in glycolysis, whether it's the electron transport chain, if I have nothing else to use it for, my sodium-potassium pump is like, give it to me now. I gotta make this inside and outside different. So I'm not going to have a lot of ATP floating around in the cell. I might have stored sugar. I might have some other storage molecules, but ATP itself is pretty much as soon as I build it, I'm going to use it right away. If for nothing else, to make me a salty banana, I'll use it right away. So Jacqueline asked a good question, which is a comparison that we now need to make. I'm going to make a clean whiteboard to make our question or our comparison. So Jacqueline's question asked about breaking down ATP, the rate of breaking down ATP. Is that the same thing as the rate of running out of ATP? The short answer to that question is no. So let's make some comparisons to show us why. I'm going to build us a table here. So we've got fast glycolytic fibers. We've got fast oxidative fibers. And we've got slow oxidative fibers. Those are 3 types of fibers. What we need to know, number 1, how do they make ATP? That's the first thing we need to know. We need to know how much ATP they make. Okay? And we need to know how quickly they break ATP. And we can add to our list here how strong the contractions are. And to tie in Jacqueline's question, how quickly is ATP gone? How quickly do they run out? These are some good compare and contrasts for us to make. These kinds of things, these first 3 especially, are going to help us answer this last question here. So let's start with our fast glycolytic fibers. This type of tissue, fast glycolytic fibers, how does it make its ATP? Which way is it making its ATP? If it's fast glycolytic, what does its name tell me? Yeah, so its energy is going to come from glucose. We're going to use that process called glycolysis. So we're breaking down glucose. That's the way fast glycolytic fibers make ATP. Yeah, so Tierney made a good point. I probably should have added to my list. When we talk glycolysis, remember we do not need oxygen. So keep that in mind. I'll put a little note here. No oxygen. Glycolysis is no oxygen. When I do glycolysis, do I make a lot or a little bit of ATP? How much ATP do I make? Did we say it was a lot or a little? Yeah, I'm just making a little ATP. I'm not going to make you memorize the numbers. I'll put it there just for a heads up for you. About 2 to 4 molecules of ATP. I just make a very little bit of ATP using glycolysis. Okay, glycolytic. Here's the information that glycolytic told me. That I use glycolysis and I just make a little bit of ATP. Before we move on to some of these other questions, let's quickly bounce over to my other fibers that have the word oxidative in their name. These oxidative fibers, how did they make their ATP? How do oxidative fibers make their ATP? Yep, so they've got to have oxygen. And what's the process that uses that oxygen? Yeah, so Tierney's right there, long name, right? Electron transport chain. The electron transport chain ends with oxygen. So we've got to have oxygen for these ones here, electron transport chain. Both of my oxidative muscle fibers use the electron transport chain. Okay. When I use the electron transport chain, that made a lot or a little ATP. How much does the electron transport chain make? Yep, the electron transport chain makes a lot of ATP. Again, numbers I'm not going to make you memorize, somewhere in the ballpark of 32 to 36 ATPs. A lot more ATP. So if I have an oxidative fiber, it's going to make a lot of ATP. It's going to make a lot because it uses the electron transport chain. But remember, the electron transport chain needs oxygen. Okay, what we've looked at are these words, glycolytic and oxidative. Let's switch gears now to look at how quickly ATP is broken up. This is a fast glycolytic fiber. Promise, it's not a trick question. How quickly does a fast glycolytic fiber break up ATP? Only Hannah is not afraid of that question. A couple of people. I promise it's not a trick question. Its name says fast. It breaks ATP up fast. Fast glycolytic fibers. They're going to work really fast. Yeah, they're going to chop stuff up. Yeah, and I was like, I knew I'd get one right. Absolutely. So we've got two types of fibers up here that are fast fibers. That means they're working fast to break down ATP. Not a trick question. Here we go. Slow oxidative fibers. How quickly are those guys working? There we go. Yep. I even like the way that Hannah typed it too, because I was totally going to type it long too. Slow oxidative fibers. They're breaking down that ATP slowly. If I chop up my ATP slowly, my muscle contraction is going to be weaker. My muscle contraction is going to be weaker because I chop up my ATP more slowly. Now, we have two types of fibers that we said chop up their ATP fast. These are going to be my two types of strong fibers. The ones that are the strongest are the ones that can make ATP the fastest. Was it glycolytic or oxidative that we said can make ATP really fast? Who can make it quickly? We are 50-50 split. Here's my hint for us as we're trying to figure out which one it is. Because like I said, we're literally 50-50 here. Glycolytic versus oxidative. So Nicole honed in on it. When I do glycolytic process of making ATP, I'm breaking down glucose. I'm breaking down a form of energy that's already in my cell. So I'm chopping up something that's already there to make it into ATP. Glycolysis, this process, it may only make a little bit of ATP, but it makes that little bit of ATP really fast. Glycolysis happens faster than the electron transport chain because I've got to get the electron transport chain to start. Kind of like starting a car engine. You got to turn it over to get it going. Once we get it started, we can make a lot of ATP with it, but it's not automatically going to start. So glycolysis happens more quickly, meaning I have ATP available more quickly. That means that I'm going to have the strongest contractions from fast glycolytic fibers. Here's how we got here. Remember, I chop up my ATP fast. That means I've got a strong contraction. I've got energy stored in my cell, which means I can build ATP quickly as well. My strongest muscle contractions come from fast glycolytic fibers. They break up ATP quickly, and the ATP is available quickly as well. Fast oxidative fibers, once we build that ATP from the electron transport chain, they can make strong contractions as well, but they can't do it quite as quickly as the fast glycolytic fibers can. So when we talk about fast oxidative fibers, they're still strong. These are still going to be stronger contractions than my slow fibers are. It's just they're not going to be quite as strong as the fast glycolytic fibers. Now, the question that got us down this entire bunny hole here was Jacqueline's question right here. Who runs out of ATP the most quickly? when we consider this question, how quickly do we run out of ATP? We need to look at two things. Thing number one, we need to look at how much ATP do we make. If I make a whole bunch of ATP, it's going to take longer for me to run out of ATP. If I don't make very much, I'm going to run out faster. Second thing we need to look at is we need to look at how quickly we're chopping up the ATP that we have. If I chop up my ATP really fast, the amount of ATP that I have is going to break down more slowly, or more quickly, excuse me. If I'm working really slow, we got some slow ATP breaking down going on, that ATP is going to last a lot longer. So first we consider how much ATP we build. Notice that if I use glycolysis to build ATP, I don't build very much ATP. I have a limited supply of ATP. And hey, while we're at it, let's chop up that very little bit of ATP that I have very quickly. That's what fast glycolytic means. I build a little and I chop it up quickly. My ATP is going to run out really quickly. So what we could change this to, here, let's put another label on this category. What we could change this to is maybe the endurance of the muscle tissues, how long they can contract for. Fast glycolytic fibers, they run out of ATP really fast. So ATP is gone fast. What do you think that means about the endurance of these types of muscle fibers? Could they contract for a long time or a short time? If I run out of ATP quickly, yeah, I'm not going to be able to contract very long. So endurance equals low, not long time. We cannot contract this type of muscle tissue for a very long time. So this is really great if you need to do an activity that requires a lot of energy really fast. So I gave the example of Olympic sports. If you're doing a deadlift, where for just a very short period of time, you just got to grab a really heavy weight, lift it up really fast, and drop it again. If we don't need to do things for very long, then we're good. These fibers can give me a really strong contraction for a really short period of time, but it's a really strong contraction. If all you need is one really strong contraction, fast glycolytic fibers are the way to go, because they're the strongest fibers. They also run out of ATP the quickest, though, because they only build a little bit and they break it down really fast. Okay, two types of oxidative fibers. Jesse, I'll get to the question here in a moment. My two types of oxidative fibers that I see here, both of them build a lot of ATP, right? They're oxidative. Both of them do the electron transport chain. One of them breaks down the ATP that it makes really quickly. One of them breaks down the ATP really slowly. When we talk about which of these two types of fibers run out of ATP later, who's going to have ATP that lasts the longest? Who's going to be best for an endurance activity? Yeah, the ones that are slow, right? So the fact that I break down my ATP slowly, and the fact that I make so much ATP, it's almost like with slow oxidative fibers that they never run out of ATP. Slow oxidative fibers pretty much can go almost forever. So my endurance on these ones, endurance equals high. So long time. Here, let's do two O's, right? Long time. If you need to do an endurance activity where you're doing stuff for a really long period of time, as long as it doesn't have to be a strong contraction, slow oxidative fibers are your jam. They have almost an unlimited supply of ATP because they're doing the electron transport chain. and they're breaking it down slowly. That's going to allow what they have to last pretty much forever. Slow oxidative fibers, very high endurance. Or the flip side of that, it's called muscle fatigue, when muscles don't have energy to do their actions anymore. A slow oxidative fiber does not fatigue very easily. It's going to keep going for a very long period of time. Fast oxidative fibers still build a lot of ATP, but remember, they are using that ATP quickly. They are fast. So my ATP, I'm still breaking it down. I'm making more of it though. So fast oxidative fibers, they're not going to run out of their ATP nearly as quickly as the fast glycolytic fibers did. Remember, they ran out really fast. Fast oxidative fibers are going to kind of be in the middle, right? So ATP runs out slowly. It's going to take longer for me to run out of ATP in a fast oxidative fiber because I'm making so much of it. But remember, I'm also chopping it down quickly, which means eventually I will run out because I'm going to outpace that. My endurance level, or how quickly I fatigue, we're going to say moderate, or here I'll put middle, in the middle between them. Endurance is kind of middle of the road. Fast glycolytic fibers, zero endurance. Use it a few times, it's done. Fast oxidative fibers, that's middle of the road. I can use them a little bit longer. If I'm doing something forever though, it's going to be those slow oxidative fibers that allow me to do that. So let me look at my chat here. Nicole asked which ones would last for a sprint versus like a high jump. So a sprint would be, it depends how long the sprint is. I would say most likely if you're doing something like sprinting, more than just a couple of seconds, you're probably going to see some fast oxidative fibers helping you out with that. The initial right off the block when you're running is probably your fast glycolytic fibers that get you started right away. And then those fast oxidative ones would probably kick over. And if you happen to be running a marathon, we would definitely want those slow oxidative fibers to be active during that time. So Vanessa asked about labor. So the thing with these three types of fibers we're talking about is we're actually only talking about skeletal muscle tissue. Let's do an application question here. When you're doing the process of labor, we're contracting the muscles of the uterus. Any guesses what kind of muscle tissue is in the uterus? Or put it another way, do we decide when the uterus contracts? Yeah, we're all correctly identifying. The uterus has smooth muscle. We absolutely do not decide when those contractions happen, right? So it's involuntary contraction. So when we're talking about the process of labor, it wouldn't actually be any of these specific types that we're talking about here. This is just stuff for skeletal muscle tissue. I would presume, I haven't studied smooth muscle quite as much in depth, but I would presume that surely, especially with something like labor, that we would have to use the electron transport chain to make that happen, because it takes so long. Like you said, it's a lot of strong contractions for a long time. So I would presume that you would need you'd need to have oxidative energy sources in there. Jesse has a question.
Okay, so I was going to ask, when you were talking about the fast glycolytic fibers, would boxing come into that, like punching, or like if somebody was chopping wood and they're slamming the thing down, is that like the same type of would use glycolytic fibers?
So if we only needed to do that once or just a couple of times, we could possibly use fast glycolytic fibers for that. For the most part, though, if we're doing something, especially like boxing, where it's a match and it's going on for a while, we actually would probably be more likely to need to have some fast oxidative fibers helping with that too. Because these ones, the endurance on these is super low. We might land a few really awesome punches with our fast glycolytic fibers, but then they've literally chopped up all the glucose they have stored and they can make no more energy. These fibers get dead really fast. They've got no more, they're not dead, to be fair. They just can't do strong muscle contractions anymore, put it that way. If we're doing a match for any length of time, we are also going to have to involve some of these ones in it as well, just because they're the ones that can make more energy and last longer. So if we do anything beyond just once or twice, probably going to have to use some oxidative fibers to make that happen. Several of us are asking a question related, well, so Jacqueline asked the question and several of us are saying that we agree, we want to cover that. The question that we are asking is about the protein called myoglobin. I don't have a lot of space, but we're gonna, here, we'll type about myoglobin in orange. I haven't really used orange yet. Myoglobin. Okay, so myoglobin is the little brother of the protein hemoglobin. What does hemoglobin do in the body? What was the job of hemoglobin? Yeah, exactly. Hemoglobin is the protein that I found inside red blood cells that help them to transport oxygen. So myoglobin is the protein inside skeletal muscle cells that help them to have oxygen. When we think about our types of muscle fibers here, which types use oxygen? Who needs to have myoglobin? Who uses oxygen? Yeah, we're absolutely right. The types that use oxygen are the ones that are oxidative. Their name even tells us that, right? Oxidative, we need oxygen. So the level of myoglobin in a fast oxidative fiber is going to be high. The level of myoglobin in a slow oxidative fiber is going to be high. The level in a fast glycolytic fiber, they use glycolysis. Does glycolysis take oxygen? Do I need oxygen for glycolysis? I don't need it. So fast glycolytic fibers have very little or no myoglobin inside of them. So the amount of oxygen that a fiber is going to use to contract, to build its energy, if you will, that's going to tell us how much myoglobin that we need. If you're not using oxygen, you don't need myoglobin. Remember, cells are only going to build what they need. If I don't use oxygen, I don't need myoglobin. I'm not going to build it. If I use it as my energy source, I'm going to need to have a lot of that myoglobin. So lots of myoglobin in my types of protein, or my types of cells that are oxidative. They're going to have a lot of myoglobin. Glycolytic, not so much. Let me see. It said just fast oxidative has high levels, so slow oxidative would have less. When you refer to it, are you talking about the guided lesson, or where did that information come from? Yeah, so again, it has to do with how quickly, well, so did it specifically say that slow oxidative has less than fast oxidative? I think that's accurate, but I'm trying to remember for sure how it was phrased in that lesson. It was a fill-in. Okay, I might look into that. I believe it is accurate that we would have the most myoglobin in a fast oxidative fiber, because if you think about it, fast oxidative fibers use ATP really quickly. So my electron transport chain pretty much constantly needs to be going. With my slow oxidative fibers, I don't use that ATP as quickly, so I wouldn't need as much oxygen because I'm doing that process a little bit less quickly. So I believe that would be accurate. I will check into the guided lesson just to see. And if you can send me an email to remind me, that would help me remember to check. If you can give me the page number and just an email reminder, otherwise I might forget. In general, though, what I want you to know big picture about myoglobin levels, if you're oxidative, you have a lot of myoglobin. If you're glycolytic, you do not have a lot of myoglobin. The other thing that we need to know about too, the amount that things have, is mitochondria. The amount of mitochondria. Does anyone know from their studying why are mitochondria important in the context of what we're talking about here? How does the mitochondria relate to anything we've got on this slide right here? Yeah, I use it to make ATP. And is the mitochondria used for glycolysis or for the electron transport chain? Yeah, so Christina's correct. Mitochondria are the location of the electron transport chain. So this is where the electron transport chain is found, is inside mitochondria. If you remember from lab that the mitochondria looked kind of funky, let's see if I can draw us one. The mitochondria had these little inside wavy parts in them, so it looked kind of like this, remember? That's because all of these little folds have the electron transport chain proteins embedded in them. So the mitochondria actually had two membranes in it. The inside one had all of the electron transport chain there. Okay, so not a trick question. Which of my types of fibers here would you expect to have a lot of mitochondria? Who's going to have a lot of mitochondria based on what we just talked about? Yeah, we're questioning again. Mitochondria are the location of the electron transport chain proteins. So anybody who uses the electron transport chain is going to need to have a lot of mitochondria. So it's my slow oxidative fibers. They're going to have lots of mitochondria. It's my fast oxidative fibers, because again, they're oxidative because they use the electron transport chain. Fast glycolytic fibers, they don't use the electron transport chain to make their ATP. They're not going to have a lot. They'll still have some. They'll have a few. But they're not going to have nearly as many as fast oxidative fibers and slow oxidative fibers. These are the ones that use the electron transport chain to make their energy, and the electron transport chain is inside mitochondria. So lots of mitochondria in oxidative fibers, lots of myoglobin in oxidative fibers as well. Both of those are related to oxygen. Maybe that'll help you remember oxidative fibers have a lot of them. We've just talked a bunch. I need to stop talking. I need you guys to tell me what questions we still have or what thoughts we still have about our types of skeletal muscle tissue. Flexing our brain muscles, right? But technically the brain doesn't have muscles, to be fair. If you're not actively typing a question, can you send me an emoji so I know that you're not typing a question? Vanessa is a screaming cat. I feel ya. Jacqueline's pondering. That's okay. This is another thing that is going to take practice, and it's going to take thinking through it multiple times. I don't expect it to make sense right away. Yep, just like everything else, right? I kind of warned you guys when we started lesson number 9 that there's a lot of stuff like this, right? That we've got to practice our way through. So this table that we made together, I think, would be a really good way for you to study these things, because these are the kind of questions that we have to be able to answer about these kinds of tissues. So definitely, if you didn't already write down this table, you didn't build it with us, build it now or take a picture of it. And as you're studying for the exam, what I would recommend doing too is build yourself a copy of this table that's blank and see if you can fill it in with the information that we put here on our table. So yeah, Christina says that the charts and tables are super helpful for her. I think it's a great way for you to organize your information, because if you look at those learning objectives for this lesson, one of the learning objectives, and I think I even gave it to you point blank in the outline, is I ask you which kind of fibers are going to function better if you give them more myoglobin, or which ones are going to function better if I give them more mitochondria. We need to know, going into those kinds of questions, who already uses those to make ATP. It's really not going to make a difference for a fast glycolytic fiber if you give it more mitochondria, because the way a fast glycolytic fiber makes its energy is glycolysis. It's not going to help that type of fiber if you give it more mitochondria. It doesn't use mitochondria. What could help this kind of fiber is if I gave it more glucose, because that's the way it makes energy. Glucose is not really going to help a fast oxidative fiber. What's going to help a fast oxidative fiber is more myoglobin, or more oxygen, or more mitochondria. So if we know the way that things work, we can make predictions about what would help them to work better. So keep that in mind. Anna's feeling Christmas. I like it too. Yep, it's almost time to decorate for Christmas. That honestly is all I've got for today. Yeah, so Jacqueline wants us to look over those phrases on the last page. Let me see if I put that in my slides. If not, you'll have to bear with me and I'll type them up. Let's see. Oh, no, I did. Perfect. Okay, so I promise these questions are as straightforward as they sound based on what we just talked about here. So my first question here asks us, if we have more mitochondria, who is going to benefit if we have more mitochondria? Who does that help if they get more mitochondria? Yeah, so that's going to help all oxidative types. All oxidative types. That's fast and slow, right? So put in parentheses, fast and slow. Both of them use mitochondria to build their ATP. So if I use mitochondria, I'm an oxidative type of fiber. You give me more of them, I can work even better. If I increase the amount of glycogen, who's that going to help? Who uses glycogen to build their energy? Yeah, that's my glycolytic fibers, right? We have one type of glycolytic fibers, fast glycolytic fibers. They use glycogen to build their energy. So glycolytic fibers. And last question, myoglobin, my oxygen storing protein, who's that going to help if I give more myoglobin? Who's going to benefit from having more myoglobin? Yep, again, it's those oxidative types, right? Fast and slow. Yeah, so Jacqueline, you're totally right. You were overthinking it. I promise this question, the goal of these questions is to be straightforward. If we know who uses mitochondria, if we know who uses glycogen, if we know who uses myoglobin, we can totally answer this question. It's just extending what's already there. What they already have, give them more. They'll be able to work even better. Now that's all I got. So what other questions do we have? Yeah, you're welcome, Jacqueline. I'll draw us our penguin. Lady penguin. I like that, Jesse. That's pretty funny. Here, today's penguin is going to be lifting weights, since we're talking about muscle tissue, right? I'm gonna give him a little headband, a little sweatband. Got his hair going on here. So his hair is looking crazy because he's at the gym. Our penguin's getting buff. Yeah, so Jacqueline, no more live sessions like this week. I will have open office hours on Thursday. So as you're working between now and Thursday, if you think of specific questions that you want to chat out with me, you're welcome to show up on Thursday. I'm not going to plan anything, so just bring questions that you have. Like I said, it's open office hour time. So I will be available. I will be traveling, so hopefully my internet is nice, which is why I didn't plan a live session in case my internet's not nice. But Thursday morning at 9:30, you're welcome to stop by, or at 10, excuse me. Thursday morning at 10, from 10 to 11:30. If you have questions, you want to chat out with me, feel free to stop by. Jacqueline, what you'll do without me is you can get in touch with your friends. I promise that your classmates can help you with the questions too. And you can feel free to email me. I know email's not as efficient as class time, right? But it's something. So I will still be here, albeit from slightly a distance. Right? Yes, thank you, Tyranny. We will definitely be safe. We're going, for anyone who cares, we're going to a cabin in Oklahoma, in the sticks, if you will, in Oklahoma, backwoods Oklahoma. So we're, yeah, in Broken Bow, actually, you know the area. So we're renting a cabin in Broken Bow, and we're gonna be outside and enjoying the rain. So that's what we're doing. Yeah, hopefully it doesn't freeze. I think it's gonna. I think we're far enough from all the crazy rain and stuff right now, down in, because it's in southeastern Oklahoma. We shouldn't have freezing problems, hopefully. Yes, I remember that, Jesse, that you said you lived in OKC. We've enjoyed OKC quite a bit. Okay, well, one last friendly reminder. The assignment for lesson number 9 is due Friday. So usually lecture stuff is due Sunday. This one is due Friday. So make sure that you're getting it done by then. And if you can do me a favor, if somebody can send out in the group me a quick reminder that it's due on Friday, I will still post that reminder in Blackboard like I always do. But I think a more efficient way for people to remember that it's due Friday is that group me chat. So if someone could send out that reminder, I would greatly appreciate it. I will get this recording posted for us. So you can review it again later if you're missing me, right? Otherwise, I'm available via email. or if you want to stop by Thursday morning, you are welcome to. So good luck on this lesson, and feel free to reach out with questions.